So, so this is a new presentation, right? And seeing the room so beautifully full, it's going to be it's a very good opportunity to test it. So anything that we don't like, we can always change for the next time when we actually have a little, how to say it, less people in the room. So the Startups Cargo Cult. For those who don't know me, my name is Max Gurvits. We're doing this new organization together called CCC Startups. We're community building. This event right over here, Startup Adventure, is actually one of the test events that we're doing this year. Next year, we'll be back, by the way, in Poland in April. We'll be doing a tour of cities where we're bringing this kind of content, meeting local startups, local investors, etc. So what is a cargo cult? Does anyone, except you guys in the room, know what a cargo cult is? Cargo cult? Anyone? A cargo cult is a very interesting phenomenon which started during the war. So during the Second World War, the United States, when it was fighting Japan, used the Melanesian Islands, nowadays known as Vanuatu, Tuvalu, and the other one, Tokelau. They used them as bases from where they would fight. Technical problems. Yeah, it's good now? Okay, not too loud. They used them as bases where, from which they would attack the Japanese army. And on these islands at that time, people lived in, in very aboriginal conditions. Those were primitive civilizations that before that never had any contact with the Western world. So imagine this, it's 1941, people are running around naked there with spears, hunting for wild animals, and suddenly the US Army, the US Air Force lands with planes, with equipment, with radio stations, and to keep the local population happy, they're giving them some stuff like Coca-Cola bottles, they're giving them Hershey chocolates, they're giving them some canned, Spam beef and stuff like this. The war ends, the Americans leave, and the local guys are like, what's going on? Where's the food? Where are the drinks? So they start this thing which you can best compare to a religion, I guess, we'll come to that later, where they start building all kinds of symbols of the US military presence, like fake runway made out of palm leaves, a fake air traffic control tower, made of wooden sticks. And they would have all these attributes, and they would do these rituals waiting for the plane to come, because they know that if you have a runway, that's when the plane with the food comes, right? It was that simple. And researchers that noticed this very interesting cultural phenomenon called it the cargo cult, because it's the cult of the cargo that comes into the plane with a plane, right? You want food, you have to pray basically with a little airfield so that the food comes. This is it was first kind of made really popular by Richard Feynman, an exceptional American scientist who was part of the Manhattan Project that developed the nuclear bomb. Became a very very lauded mathematician after that. And he saw a similar thing in science. He saw people doing pseudoscience, a fake science, and he called it cargo cult science, right? So it has, it's all about the form. You're doing the right stuff, the form-wise. You're kind of copying the conditions. Everything looks like it's the real thing, but the only problem, there is no substance. There is absolutely no content. It's just a ritual. There's no real science. People just pretend to be scientists. The whole cargo cult phenomenon became really, really popular in the last couple of years, specifically because last year the Burning Man Festival, which is like a cult thing for Silicon Valley, they used that as their main theme. So it was the whole festival was themed as with cargo cults. So for instance, people would build up these installations looking like a cargo cult, a fake runway, a fake traffic tower, and since then you hear more and more comparisons in the startup world, in the tech world, to the cargo cults. Sounds familiar, right? It's actually a religion. That's actually how religions start, right? You don't understand something, so you create a certain ritual around specific kind of, actions that are supposed to lead to the desired result. But is it the same for startups? Don't we see a lot of that in the startup world? As you look into the way startup communities are based, if you look into the ways the startups are behaving themselves, you could actually argue that there's a lot of cargo cult content in startups as well. Just look at it, there is a lot of, if you look the way startups are popularly perceived, TV shows like Silicon Valley are a tribute to that. It's all about the hype, the glamour. It's a great way to socially distinguish yourself from peers that are, have boring jobs or are stuck in all kinds of gray, 9-to-5 existence. Whereas, being a startup is so cool. You get to hang out with cool people. You get to pitch all kinds of cool things. You get to use the F word professionally all the time. We all do it. I try to do it less and less, but it's hard. Whereas, in reality, that's Captain Obvious from the Hotels.com commercial. Startups are really a pain, right? Startups are actually very hard. You will never hear anyone who has successfully built a company or an investment company or whatever it is in the startup world that you're doing, whether it's businesses or you're investing in them, that it's super easy, glamorous. The whole glamorous thing is something you see from the outside, and that's what a lot of people are inspired about. But in reality, it's super hard. You basically get slapped by everyone. This is the guy in the middle is tied to the rack is the founder. That's the investor on the left, that's your customer on the right, and they're making your life a real hell. Looking at startups, two phases you can distinguish, right? Before validation and after validation. It's kind of a metamorphosis that happens in startups. Before validation, everything is very sweet and nice and very cool. Like Miley Cyrus, when she started, she was the daughter of a famous singer, and she sang these hillbilly country songs, and it was all very cool. Then she, when she became big, she actually transformed into this monster with a wrecking ball. Very similar things happen with startups. Before validation, the wisdom is pretty simple. What you got to do, you got to stay cheap, keep it very lean. That's why we always talk about Central and Eastern Europe. That's why we talk about geographies like Poland, like Ukraine, like Bulgaria, where it's very easy to run the pre-validation part of your startup because your expenses are super low. To hire people to actually pay the rent, you don't need that much, right? You need very little. You got to iterate and experiment. That's also pretty simple. Try a lot of different stuff. If something sticks, then it's good. If it doesn't stick, kill it early, fail often, fail fast, the usual stuff. And you got to understand the problem. That's probably the most important part of the whole pre-validation phase in startups, right? You have to understand the customer. You have to understand what is the real pain, and you have to find ways to solve it. However, in that very early phase, because it's a hyped up thing, we actually see a lot of cargo cults, right? One of them, to start with, are the accelerators. In reality, this is the way it really works. There are very few really successful accelerator programs. Y Combinator is renowned, and it's an accelerator that has actually proven that it can launch really successful companies. Two of them are really big and famous. It's Airbnb and Dropbox. There are a couple of runners-up that have done very well, that have been acquired at nice valuations. Techstars and 500 Startups are another, successful accelerators that you see in the world. And then below that, Vitaly already mentioned on stage this morning, there are, millions basically, not literally millions, but countless numbers of accelerators. You can't really see the logos over there, and they're not really accelerator logos, but you can choose a color and a shape, and you will find an accelerator logo with that color and shape. There are so many of them, and their success is really, questionable. They're probably doing something good in terms of educating the community, but this whole thing that, an accelerator is a place where people come together to build the next Google, that's not really the case. It's actually really hard to find a successful company that went through an accelerator. Dropbox, Airbnb are like the super ships that have actually done it, but very few have. It's more of a hype thing, a cult thing. The other cargo cult that we see a lot in startups is the pitching fetish, as I call it, right? You got to pitch. I've been involved with a number of accelerators as a mentor, where literally the whole idea of pitching your startup, the ability to do this Rockstar pitch on stage, is kind of the main deliverable. There was an accelerator that I know very well, for instance, where out of the 3 months of the program, they probably spend like 6-7 weeks just on pitch training, right? And then there is demo day. Demo day comes, and everyone pitches, and it's all a great party, and then there are beers and sandwiches and stuff, and then no one gets an investment because, hey, there are only actually 2 investors in that city, and of course they know the startups very well because they're also the mentors and whatnot. So the question is, why do you make such a fetish out of the pitching, right? It's a good thing to be able to pitch. You definitely should be able to pitch, but why make a fetish out of it? Pitching is actually pretty simple. In your first pitch, you should be able in 2 minutes, because that's the length you usually get in a random encounter, to be able to kind of clearly say the story, like what is it that you're doing, why you're doing it, and what do you need, right? What do you need from that person? And if you're successful, you can get invited to a meeting where you get 20 minutes, let's say, half an hour maybe, to do your story, and then you have to really have a very clear structured story. You go on Google. If you type in on Google the perfect pitch deck, you will find many examples of the 10 slides or the 20 slides that are essential in a pitch. That's what you got to be able to do. Tell your story in 2 minutes, then elaborate on your story in 20 minutes. And it doesn't really take it doesn't take a big hype to be able to do this. Pitch should actually have what are you doing, how are you doing it, why are you doing it. Don't use jargon, don't use all kinds of long explanations. Because small group that we are here, if I can share kind of a thought, I think that in Poland there's a particular problem with pitching. That's my opinion. I come here like every month or every 2 months, and today as well, for instance, I meet a lot of people that are telling me all kinds of stories, and I'm like, I listen for 5 minutes and I still don't get what you're doing, right? So you guys got to practice on that a little bit, but you don't have to, you don't need to have this crazy fetish with being on stage all the time and doing all kinds of pitch practice. It's simple. Dave McClure said it very well. This is a tweet of his last year, which I really, really like, is that people think that great startup pitches are like a good novel, like it's a whole story with like a plot that unravels itself, And we had this yesterday during the pitches in the morning. That guy came on stage and he said like, "Oh, I'm doing something so complicated. 4 minutes are really not enough to say about it." And then when he didn't explain shit, and the jury was asking him questions, they were like, "Well, you see, I told you this was very difficult. You would never understand it in 4 minutes, right?" McClure said it very well. Pitches should actually be a punchline. What's happening? The most important thing, traction, if you have it, or if you don't have traction, something else, boom, that's it. That's the one impression you want to leave your audience with. The next cargo cult that I see a lot is the lean. We're hating lean all the time here, and I use a little pussycat over here as well as my slide, unintentional. Lean is a cool thing, but it's overemphasized. People are really making religion and a cult out of lean. Don't really do it. To be honest, like the guys that are writing all these lean books, like Eric Ries and Ash Maurya, they're making a lot of money with it, and it's wonderful. They build a great business about it, but it's not a one-fits-all solution, right? Lean is an interesting thought. It's a methodology that, to an extent, can be used and has a lot of very good components in it, but don't make a cult out of it. Just, you don't make a cult out of, I don't know. Nowadays, maybe everything is made a cult of. You don't make a cult out of your underwear or something, right? It's just something you actually need every day, but it's there, right? You don't use it. As been said by many people already, Steve Blank is actually the author of many ideas about which then were rehashed into the lean ideas. If you just follow Steve Blank, if you follow his Twitter, if you read his blog, if you read he has this book it's called something with Epiphany. That's pretty much all you got to know. Don't really go into this lean cult. I have a couple of friends in Cologne, in Germany. They have this. They have a little accelerator over there, and they did some startup trainings, and they were actually handing out everyone T-shirts with Steve Blank's face on it. That's really pushing it too far. Steve Blank is a really smart and very, very successful guy, but don't make an idol out of it. In reality, what the problem with lean, a lot of people that are professionally involved in startups, the problem that we have is that lean, useful as it is for some things to kind of help you focus on iterating, it's used as an excuse to fail, right? Because you're trying out stuff, it's not working. Hey, we're lean. We're doing everything by the book. So it's a super acceptable way to fail, right? We've pivoted gazillions of times, and we're lean, and we're cool because we haven't found our product market fit or whatever they call it yet. But in reality, you got to be focused on success. It was mentioned yesterday by Alex, today also by Vitaly. Try to be successful. You don't actually learn that much from those failures. It's just you got to cut the losses and move on. Next, cargo cult. Minimum viable product. This is kind of a concept thing. There's nothing wrong with minimum viable products. They're absolutely required. But I hear more and more recently, as this term is becoming popular, I see more and more people saying, "Oh, we need," for instance, a sentence like this: "We need 100,000 euros to build our minimum viable product." You don't know if you'll have a minimum viable product. Is something that happens. You can analyze and establish that there is minimum viable product built, or you can establish that there isn't one, but you can't actually forecast that we have to do this to get to MVP. MVP is what you get. It's not something you can work to. It's established through discovery. So, if you've seen the movie Interstellar, it's a very, very good example of how the MVP formula works. So, they have this situation where they're in a spaceship or whatever, and they have the physical ability to go to 4 planets and try to establish human life there, right? So, how many people have seen Interstellar here? Almost everyone. Not entirely everyone. A really cool movie. Not that difficult. It's actually pretty simple, the whole story. So, they go to these 4 planets to kind of to try to see if it's going to work. If it will work, if a human can survive there, that's a minimum viable situation. If not, not. But it's not something like, yeah, we're going to do that because that will be an MVP. You don't really know. You don't actually know. So going back to Miley Cyrus, I kind of like her, as you can see. This was before. This was the whole story before validation, the cargo cults and the things we see before validation. Now, of course, you'll ask yourself, how do you know when you get to validation? This is a question that I ask a lot, that get asked a lot. People say like, yeah, when do you think a product is validated? It's pretty hard. There are a couple of rules of thumb. If it's a business solution, usually what I've seen, in my personal practice and companies that have done well, is that if there is a certain number of recurring business or enterprise customers, that usually you can say that there is validation. Definitely, if you have a waiting list, like if you're billing those customers and you're making payroll, you're actually making enough money to survive, and you have a whole waiting list of other companies that you know how to plug into the product. That's usually that usually means that you have validated your marketing, your sales, and your product cycle. Distribution partnerships pretty important as well. With consumer apps or consumer products, this is like a personal situation that I had. This is me holding a phone in my hand in front of my own car. And this is an app that we worked together with, we invested in Bulgaria, which does, it reads out your OBD2 analytics from your car. And this guy actually got to 100,000 downloads, and to, I don't remember the percentage, something like 5 or 6% of them were paid, which is, we considered that was a pretty good validation. It was time to move on. So you can't really put a finger on it in terms of like, this is, you made it, that's the milestone, you're validated, but the numbers should be somewhere there. You should have a convincing amount of consumers using it, or a solid amount of business customers paying for your product. Now, when we go to to the point after validation, there are a number of cargo cults there as well. One of them is the whole thing, which I hear a lot about in Eastern Europe, with adjacent geographies, right? Where people would say like, we want to do like Bulgaria, that's where I spend a lot of time, or used to spend a lot of time, and then maybe we'll do Romania or something, or Turkey is right next door to us, so maybe we should do Turkey. Or if you guys are here in Poland, I'm sure it's Germany and Russia maybe for some of you. In reality, most products don't really, I should say it differently. In reality, it's really, really slow and painstakingly hard to kind of distribute a product country by country in Europe and in most other places as well, because cultures are different. I remember I learned this lesson in a very painful way from my own startup. We were doing okay in Holland, but we figured out that we automatically thought, okay, let's do Germany, let's do Belgium. Especially Belgium, it's the same damn language, Dutch, right? So if something works in the Netherlands, for sure it must work in Belgium. But what we actually figured out, that trying it, that apparently Belgium had a completely different market. So sales works differently there, marketing is different, the whole product culture is different there. We were trying to disrupt law firms, law services. And in Belgium it was different. People had insurances for that, and it was like made up of small law offices instead of big ones like in Holland. So you can adjust, but it's really hard. A couple of months ago I was talking to the head of sales of a very large Austrian insurance company, Unica, and he was complaining to me. He said, we are probably the biggest in almost every Balkan country. Bulgaria, Macedonia, Albania, Bosnia, Montenegro, Kosovo, Croatia, Romania, Moldova, on and on and on. There are a lot of countries in the Balkans. And he said that it's really hard because, we go to a new market like Macedonia, it's exactly the same as Bulgaria. It's almost the same language. It's like 1 million or 2 million people or something. But you got to start again, because there's a government. That government needs bribes. You need to rent an office. They have a law that the customer service must be in their own language, and it's really hard. So if you actually, if you're building something scalable, if you're not that Austrian insurance company, because for them that's their business, but if you're actually doing something scalable, you made it work in Poland, go big. Go where the real win is. You don't actually, after Poland, it's with the same effort you can do a really big market, like the United States, for instance, or at least, let's say, United Kingdom, rather than going to, let's say, Lithuania or Hungary or Ukraine or whatever. This is how the world really looks like, right? For those of you who have been there yesterday, you saw this slide. This is the world according to money, according to wealth. So you see basically a couple of really big spots, right? You see United States, you see China and India and Japan, but as we actually discussed on the previous panel with David Beiser, geographies, and Mike mentioned this as well, geographies in Asia are really, really hard to get into if you're not local, whereas the United States is a place where they're used to all kinds of technology companies coming in and making it big in that market. Europe, as you can see, is a pretty big blurb as well, but as you can see, all the countries, they're very fragmented. So Germany is a big enough market, but it's actually not that very big. And if you want to do Germany, you have to focus yourself on Germany. It has to be totally German, and that's the really hard part. Go where the really big blurbs are, which means usually the US, almost always, as the launch market. You can definitely do Japan or China or India, but you have to have a very strong cultural connection, because they will not simply, it's a completely different way of doing business there. So for instance, if if you have Chinese heritage or whatever, if you have a Chinese business partner, then probably China might be a good idea. The next thing that a lot of people think about is that it's in the end of the day, it's all about adding money, right? We just need money. That's all we need. Everything works. We just, if you add the money, everything will happen. This is, I don't know if people know this photo. This is actually from the Instagram of that guy. His name is Lucas Duplan. He's the founder of a thing called Klinkle. He's, what is it, an 18 or 19-year-old guy who raised $25 million from Peter Thiel and a bunch of other, big-name, top-name investors. And he was, insensitive and probably, just young and stupid enough to make this photo shortly after he has raised his money. So he put this thing on Instagram of himself, with the cash. And that is considered, in the tech world, that behavior, specifically this very photo, is often considered as, the example of bad taste, in terms of, showing off with the money raised. And that company actually hasn't done much. They've been around for almost 2 years now, around 2 years. They just released their beta a month ago or something like this. Klinkle. And it's generally considered to be a bad story about someone raising too much money too early and being too cool about it. So money doesn't solve it, right? You need smart money. You need actually investors that can open doors. Just raising a certain amount is not a good idea. A pro tip for you guys who are activists, startup founders in Europe, don't pitch the amounts that are available, right? We all know that most funds that invest EU money have a maximum of 200,000 that they can invest. And I've had this situation in Bulgaria very often that startups would pitch, oh yeah, and we need, they pitch whatever. They're in a super early stage already. They have a product working. They have a big market or a small market, a simple product, a very complicated product. But they always pitch 200,000 euros. Like, why is everyone pitching the same amount? Oh, probably that's because that's the amount that can be invested by the local funds, right? Be much more serious about it, right? Really know how much you're raising and why, not just because that's how much that investor can give you. The next cargo cult are the Rockstar founders. This is an interesting story as well. This is a guy. His name is Steven Tan. He became famous on the internet because he was. They did this Kickstarter. Indiegogo campaign, where they promised to. They were building a smartwatch that would be. It would actually be the best smartwatch in the world, right? It would be. Water pressure, up to 100 meters below seawater level. It would have all kinds of sensors, sleep tracking, this, that. And they were raising, they were doing a crowdfunding campaign with a raise of $100,000. They closed the campaign on $1.5 million. And then what happened was that no one ever heard of them after that. So they disappeared with the money. All kinds of rebuttals of the story, by the way, were published that no, they didn't disappear and that, but most people that actually donated are super pissed off, and Indiegogo has apologized to its users and its community for this situation. Shortly after the campaign closed, that guy was photographed with a red Ferrari, and also there was a photo of him with luxury shopping bags in some mall. That's not really the way to do it, right? So don't do the Rockstar thing before you actually have achieved anything. For those of you who have been in Alex Hunter's presentation yesterday, he said it very well. Don't make a fetish out of fundraising, right? Fundraising is not something you want to celebrate. You actually celebrate sales, or if you're hiring people, not the fundraising. And of course, the last thing in my cargo cult list, this is something that I've seen a terrible amount of times, is just we need sales. We have something that is done. We just need someone to sell it for us because we don't know how to sell. But it's done, right? We never talk to customers, but it's done. So we just need this guy, this very experienced salesman over here, who is really good in selling, old cars. We need him to basically become our sales guy, and then everything will be fine. I've seen, disastrous situations in my own experience, and even unfortunately, shamefully in my own company, but definitely in the companies that I've worked with after that as an investor, where the companies would hire someone like this because he knows how to sell, right? That guy is like selling insurances to small, medium-sized businesses. We have this cloud solution for whatever. We're going to hire him, very smart on a commission basis, and he's going to sell. And what usually happens is that, in the best case, just nothing happens and you don't lose too much money, but very often you actually lose a lot because these guys tend to be expensive because they know how much they're worth, and they don't actually give you any results, right? So that's a bad thing. It's the whole customer life cycle is an intrinsic part of the product. It's not just, we have a technology or we have a product, we just need to add sales to it. Don't go there, don't make a fetish out of it. This is something that works for me. Instead of all these cults, make lists. Everything that I've always done, at least in the last maybe 5 or 6, 7 years, I'm always making these mental lists of like, okay, who do I need? What am I trying to do right now, right? I'm trying to build a company in this and this sector. Okay, let's see. Who are the 20 people that have built such companies? Who are the 20 people that have invested in such companies? Who are the 20 people that have held, top positions in those companies? Super easy to find out. Right now, in the age of the internet, we have access to stuff that only 20 years ago was available to, secret services and spy movies, right? You can actually research the hell out of everything. You can see, on Crunchbase, you can see exactly which companies did what. Who are the main operators? What happened to them? You can go on AngelList and see if any one of them is an angel investor or an advisor. You can see on LinkedIn how many people you're removed from them. And you can actually make this whole list. Even friends of mine that that get sick and tired of me mentioning this, they call it the Max 100 list because I talk so much about it. But this is actually the thing to do. Make a list of people that you need, and basically, work down that list. See how many of them you meet in a month, and 2 months, and 3 months. How many of those people you reach out to? Those people are actually probably your distribution channels, probably your investors, maybe even your hires. That's actually the way to go, instead of pitching and reading lean books. What are the good things to focus on? Hustle. There was a very cool study. I don't remember the name of it. I think it was from either Berkeley or Stanford or some other Bay Area university, where they actually researched a bunch of really successful people, like in all different walks of life, entrepreneurs, performers, successful people, politicians probably, and they tried to distill it, to the one most important quality that made them successful. And they came down to a very simple and very elegant conclusion. It's that they worked more, right? As Vitaly said this morning, the cool thing about startups is you can choose, whichever 16 hours per day you want to work. Work more than everyone else. Outwork everyone else. Shall I say this? Yeah, I'm going to say this. I noticed here in Warsaw that there is a particularly strong hipster culture in startups. There are a couple of places in this city where many of you meet to drink these fancy drinks out of Berlin or something, and everyone is like having this good time. Everyone has like funny hipster hair and all that, and everyone is being like truly fabulous all the time, right? Whereas in reality, you just got to work really hard. You can still look very cool, but you have to work very hard. And there is, in the startup world, in this growth of co-working spaces, events, pitching days, pitching for the sake of pitching and all that stuff. There is, you can feel very, very busy doing all of that stuff without actually doing any real work. A friend of mine who was an investor with 3TS, he said it very well. He said, networking is only usually one letter removed from not working, right? So keep that in mind. Just work more than everyone else. Hustle. Another very good cult is the cult, understand markets. I mentioned this already with a funny world map. You know very well that on Apple products it says made in China or wherever, designed in California, right? People always ask why Silicon Valley? Why is that so important? Why do you have to why is it look at Europe? The European Union. If you follow their official emails and Twitter feed, they constantly they like to say that they're like the biggest market of educated people in the world, or something like this. We are like 600 million consumers, and we spend much more than anyone else. But it's still, for some reason, products get first traction in the United States. Even when you look at consumer products that don't come out of the U.S., the question always is, like Spotify is a very good example, will it work in the U.S.? If it's going to work in the U.S., then you can say it's a successful product. Because that is the market that actually helps you become big in something. From there on, you can conquer your little Poland or the Netherlands or whatever other country you're from, but it's really important to understand which is the market that is the market of first big validation and dominance. Most stuff, it's the U.S. Not everything, but almost everything. The next good cult is the cult of consumers. I'm referring to Alex Hunter so much, but he gave a really good talk yesterday about this coffee brand that made him really happy. He was a customer, they did something wrong, he reached out to them on Twitter, they sent him a free pack of coffee, and said, Alex, we love you, we want you to be a customer. Focus on your customers. I don't know where this comes from. This might come from the corporate world where many of us have experienced before we do startups. Maybe it comes from somewhere else, but there is this thing, in business, or in startups actually, more than anywhere else, there are so many fires that you have to put out. There are so many problems that are coming up everywhere. So the moment that someone is a customer, done. You don't have to worry about him anymore. He's in the list. He's in the CRM. You can bill him. Push the button for recurrent billing, and it's done. And that's kind of the problem that we see. That you're worried about everything so much more than about actually the people that care the most. Care about your customers. Even if you only have, like, especially if you have very few of them. You know, I see a lot of startups that have 5 paying customers. I don't know, 300 downloads, 1,000, you know, installs or page visits. Reach out to those people. You know who they are, right? Why don't you just call them? Why don't you just pick up the phone and say, hey, how are you? What are you doing? Nice to talk to you. What do you want? What do you like? What don't you like? The next one. It's really easy, and the smaller you are, the better you will be at this. In Silicon Valley, they're taking this to, you know, absolute extremes, because a lot of people have experience with building products with this very, very strong customer focus. I would say that in Europe, in Eastern Europe, we should pay more attention to this. Talent. We talked about this with David Beiser when he was on stage. If you look generally at people that have experience in making companies big and successful, it's a very, very finite number of people. There are actually about, I don't know, a couple of thousand of people that actually have the experience of taking companies from, let's say, 200 users to 200 million users. From a small company that only has like 50 employees to a successful rocket ship that has thousands of employees. Very few people actually have that experience. And when people ask me, Max, you guys, when you look at startups, you always talk about the team. The team is so important. It's always team first. What is the team? I personally think about it like this. When you're just starting with your startup, the team it's what it is. Usually you're starting, with a flatmate, with a brother, with a friend, with a guy you know from school, with that other colleague that got fired at the same moment as you were from the big company. You don't actually get to choose your co-founders usually in the beginning. And the team in the beginning, it's what it is. It's good to have the core qualities, core competences in that team, but you don't really have a big choice. Where you do have a choice is once you have validation, once the startup actually starts becoming more serious and is going somewhere, that's when you have to hire the right people. And you have to be very, very specific about this, because especially here in Europe, there are very few right people. There are very, very few people that have the mindset and the experience of building successful companies. So that's when it comes down to. The best thing for any company that is either nearing validation or has reached validation, the best thing to keep in mind is kind of to have a list of people you would like to hire. You're just making wish lists. It comes back to my whole idea of lists. Make a wish list of people you want to hire. Just the craziest ideas. You read an interesting article on TechCrunch about someone who has a cool startup. Why wouldn't that person work for your company if his company goes bust, let's say? You met someone at an interesting conference where that person gave a good talk. Put them on the list. Make lists, because even if those people won't work for you, maybe they can advise you someone. Talent is very scarce. Real talent. Talent, with validated skills, super scarce. So that was it. Cargo cults are bullshit. We do cargo cults because we didn't know better, right? So we want success. We're all used to these stories of, someone became a billionaire after his company IPO'd. Oh, look at Mark Zuckerberg. He bought, I don't know, something, house or yacht or whatever he bought. We want to emulate that, right? We want that success. So what do we do to get to that success? Oh, let's buy, all-star sneakers, right? Let's do a pitching contest and be on stage and say the F word and behave like bad rock stars. Let's be lean and talk about it all the time. But in reality, that's not what you want to do. These are just cargo cults. Do the real thing, work very hard, focus on the problems of your customers, focus on getting the right people on your team. That is probably the best way to do it. And it's not easy. It's Sparta. It's really, really hard. It's Hunger Games. And that's why we're called CCC, because it refers to Sparta and to many other things. We want to help companies do this differently, do this better. That was it. Thank you very much. Thank you. Anyone, questions? No one has questions. You guys getting paid for listening to me, or you can tick that off your list? No one?
How did you become a boy VC?
That's ask John Biggs. He was here yesterday. Okay. So the next thing on our list, I'm going to just keep doing this. I'm going to be like Paul yesterday, just from a presenter role to the MC role. We have a panel where we're going to talk about this whole difficult move from projects to from services to products. And I'm going to invite on stage Anna. Yeah, oh, Yannicka instead of Anna. Yannicka, where are you? You want to come? You like talking about that stuff. I'm going to invite John Romley, because he happens to be in the room, and I know he loves talking about that kind of stuff. And I'm going to invite as well Vitaly. Why not? No, it's not Ellie's topic. Do we have mics anywhere? Can someone bring us 2 mics, please? And the third Mike Reiner? No.
Hello in a different part of the world. Somebody sitting there?
No, no.
I'm going to sit then in the
Okay, there you go.
nice and close.
I like to be removed from my subjects.
Thank you.
Okay, guys. So Jonathan, well, there you are. Very good to see you in Warsaw for the first time ever. Let's start with you. You know, you have experience in startups, and you've also managed, at least as far as I remember, if that can be called like that, a services business in Ukraine, where you guys were putting together all kinds of physical, logistical services with online services. How does that work? How's the what are the differences between doing the two? What are the biggest kind of problems you're facing when you're taking services and trying to productize them, or the other way around?
Well, I mean, I think probably. Hello. I think probably the biggest problem was that I was in Ukraine, and that not in like a negative way of being in the market, but one of the challenges in that market was that you could build something that was really good. I mean, whether particularly in the context of a service business, you can build something that is a really good service, and you're going to end up pricing it out of the market. So what we found is that even sort of the most premium of a buyer or of a client that you would go after, they would want this premium level of a service. But they would not want to pay. I mean, this is anyway typical anywhere in the world. It's champagne taste on a water budget, and I think that this was one of the biggest challenges, right? And as a founder, when you start a company, particularly service business, you're thinking like, okay, well, I'm going to provide really good service to my customers. And then the customers are like, fuck you, we don't want to pay you any money, and you're trying to figure out, okay, well, how do I manage in between nobody wants to pay me, but everybody wants to work with me?
Right.
Yeah.
And the cool thing about products is that you don't get to negotiate about price, right? It
Yeah.
has a price tag, and you pay. You swipe your credit card, and you're done, right?
Yeah, exactly, right? So this is a pretty simple. This is the price. You pay. You're done. At least at the consumer level, there's very little negotiation or in retail.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
I mean, and I think that for something like that, yes, you can put a price. I think when you get into the enterprise business, there's some more negotiation anyway.
Always, right.
But yeah, every single one, and particularly for us at the scale that we were working, every single deal, the best way in the end for us to get something done there, and it just happened to be in the business that we were in, which was e-commerce, sort of back office and logistics services, was to do these like open book deals, right? Where, I mean, everything is, these are my expenses, this is how much an employee costs, all the way down, and I think even then, you kind of get into this position where it was like, and we have, a 10% margin, and then you have to try to find ways somewhere else to create more money for yourself.
It's, interesting about Ukraine. We'll get back to that later, how that all works in Ukraine. Vitaly, from your, I know with your company, with Keen, you guys have been, it was always a product, I guess, but for the first product, which was more like a service to businesses, it was, I guess, more of a service thing than a product, and then you switched to an idea of a marketplace. Well, what were the reasons for doing that? So how did you come up with the idea that doing a marketplace, which is very productized, is better than billing services monthly?
So we always had a three-stage plan. First is build out the SaaS business, have SaaS subscriptions. Second is basically give them things to sell. Third would be to flip it on and get all the products into a marketplace and then drive traffic to the marketplace. What we realize in the process when you're dealing with SMBs, they're not always thinking, their priorities are not always straight. Their priorities, instead of being efficient and generating yield essentially, especially if they're in a manufacturing business like printing, they're still focused on top line. They think that the solution for all of their problems is more customers. Not necessarily true, but at a certain point, you have to kind of go with the flow. And if the market tells you we want X, it doesn't matter if it's not good for them. There's a bigger market for McDonald's than there is for vitamins, right? So you want to give them what they want. So we accelerated our strategy and basically launched a marketplace because that gives our customers what they think they need, what they want, which is more top-line business, versus necessarily profits or yield. And in the process, we can actually take a lot more of the value as a commission because they perceive it as much more important, much more difficult. So we can take a much bigger chunk of the value from the transaction.
Right. Okay. So it basically makes more sense to do a marketplace then.
Yes and no. They're not Harvard MBAs that are running these companies, so they didn't do the math right. But we're selling to them, so we need to give them what they want.
Okay. Yannicka, we talked about this already a couple of times today, but it's so very interesting. In Ukraine, there is people are addicted to outsourcing, as we like to say. The math basically shows that it's better to do products. You're one of the leaders of the, I'd say, investment scene in Ukraine. How are you guys helping companies overcome that?
If I can just elaborate it a little bit. Well, I think it's just a stage of development. I started in Estonia in '97 as programmer, and after that I found a MIT company, outsourcing company of course, and there was a whole lots of discussion, where should Estonia develop? Should it be outsourcing country, but or not so big? We don't have so many people who would outsource. The possibilities are limited, let's say, and probably we should move to startups. Then we had Skype, and there was no brainer. Then of course we moved to startups and to supporting ecosystem. Before that, or actually after that, I moved to Finland, where this discussion has had. It was 40 years ago, probably in 50s and 60s. Nokia, then it was Nokia cluster. Then were companies which were subcontracted for Nokia, doing solutions for Nokia, and then they moved to. Rovia Angry Birds came a long time later. Then it was Russia again, all over again. I was in a venture capital fund, Martinson Trigon, which has also one startup in Ukraine, Invisible CRM, quite good one. And we were searching for IT companies in 2005 in Russia, and it was all about outsourcing. That wow, they have huge pool of good outsourcers. Then it was maybe these outsourcers can also spin off their own products, launch their own products. So in Ukraine, it's all over. It's all the same. Approximately 90% is outsourcing oriented. The prices are up. We're competing against the Indias, the huge pool of not so high-level brains, but still brains out there. We're trying to be kind of cheaper, somehow better. It doesn't work this way. It's just a stage of development. And this is a problem really that, for example, in Poland, there are probably no accelerators that are commercially owned, which means government should support this very hard, really, stage of launching your own products. Of course, it's easier to be hired somewhere with average salary or above the average salary, and it's comfort zone. You have to get out of this comfort zone, and it's very hard to do this first step if you don't have this infrastructure supporting you. All kind of accelerators, incubators, angels, and so on. So right now we're trying to create this ecosystem or this supporting system, and it's going to be a long way. But
interesting. Jonathan, I don't know if you have this experience. In places like Ukraine, you meet a lot of people that are making good bucks in outsourcing, and they're like, yeah, but we want to move to products. I don't know, have you ever experienced this? I always wonder, why do people say that?
Well, I think that to be in the business of building products for other people, I think you probably have a lot of opportunities to think of how you can do something better. Right? So if your job is to build things for other people all day long, you see, and I actually think this is one of the benefits of the short list of benefits of outsourcing in IT. One thing you can benefit from is the fact that these companies that you'd be working with are all day long building products. And I mean, an example of, I don't know, 8 or 9 years ago, I was using some outsourcing in one of my businesses. And one day I got a call from, and this is, what was it, 2007, yeah? So about 8 years ago. I got a call from the CEO of this company, which was a couple thousand employees in India. And he said, Jonathan, you need to stop building this mess and ship your product. And I thought, well, that was a weird phone call from the outsourcing company guy. He's like, you just need to put it out. Just put it out.
So you were their client, right? They were
I was in this case their client. So this this was one of those cases, and we hear this now, just ship and things like this, right? This was a little bit, I think, before this was really pushed out so much. And so it was interesting, though, to see, he goes, look, we see things like this all the time. You just need to put it out.
Right.
And I think that is one advantage. So I think maybe, you're seeing things like this happen, and it can be frustrating. As somebody that's built a lot of products for other people, I think then, your dream probably just like a guy that is like maybe working on shoes, maybe dreams to make shoes of his own one day. Yeah? And if he would make them, he would make them better, and they wouldn't break, and they wouldn't scuff in the same way. So I think that's probably where that comes from, but that doesn't mean necessarily that you're going to do a good job of it, right? So whether or not you have good ideas is a totally different story. You may be able to execute really well, and your ideas might be just like horrible, right?
Yeah.
So outsourcing is all about execution,
Right.
And you might not be like the best idea guy, but you probably would have a well-executed product.
Right.
There's another angle to that.
What is the other angle to that?
That's the well, okay. So the other angle to that is that these services companies are sick of selling. They think, oh, I'm gonna build a product I don't have to sell anymore.
Yeah.
Right? So the services companies are all sell, do, sell, do, and the product companies, their perception, misguided. So that's the guided version.
Yeah.
The misguided version, which is probably even more often, is the, well, if we build a product, it's going to be easier and we're going to have to work less.
Yeah.
And there is also a risk of that, because if it's expanding market like in Ukraine, outsourcing market is growing 20%, 30% per year. So you don't really have to do very much just to go with the flow and to grow. So just to have this kick that we should take this one step further, that we should take this risk, that we should invest in our own product. It is, again, out of the comfort zone. That is not so easy to do really also. Just to support this spinning off and taking this risk, which you maybe don't have to take at this point.
Yeah. Would it be true?
But there is value to be captured, right? So the reason... So, outsource in Ukraine, they're all very comfortable. They all make 4 or 5 times more than lawyers and doctors at the top level. But what they're missing is that 90% of the value escapes to services company. Right? I think I brought this up yesterday and we were talking about it. So companies will acqui-hire engineers at $1 million a head. That engineer, you might be able to build them out, let's say 100,000 a year out of Ukraine, all said and done. But there's 90% of the value that escapes, right? And that's essentially the value of the product versus building it for somebody else.
Right. Is it because, geographies like Poland and Ukraine are probably more conservative, so people are less willing to take risks? Is that, or what do you think?
Again, it's about the stage of development, that you have to go through certain stages to have certain income, certain basis, certain pool of talents to spin it off. Just good startups don't just happen. It takes time and effort to happen. So you have to have this basis from where it's spinned out, spinned off, supported. The infrastructure is there. It's a whole lot of small pieces in puzzle. It's just not out of nowhere.
Right. Well, and I don't know much about Poland in the context that I'm going to make a statement about Ukraine, but one of the things in Ukraine and in the stage of market development that the country is in, you take a guy that is working at an outsourcing company, and you take average salary, entry level is about $2,000. It could be less, but let's say for a Java engineer coming in, it's like a couple $1,000s a month, right? And you're not even finished with university. You've got an offer that pays more than your mother and your father make combined, maybe in several months, right? So one of the risks in a market like that is that when you have this opportunity, you're creating this first generation coming from one class and going into a next class or caste or sort of subsystem of society.
Maso pyramid, yeah.
And I think this is one of the challenges, right? It's like, well, I could do a startup, or I could make money.
Yeah.
And make money that and have a life that that my parents didn't have. And I think that there's sort of this generation of outsourcing that's happening. And I think for for people now, we're seeing in Ukraine people making this decision like, you know what, I'm gonna try this, I'm gonna start something, and actually in reality the risk is very low. Because the demand for outsourcing staff is so high, you can take the risk and go and try to build something for 6 months on your own with a couple of your friends. Because in reality, and you can moonlight on Odesk or something like this, right?
Yeah.
But in reality, if it fails, you've got a job like the next day.
Yeah.
And
everyone knows that.
And
Which
I think
makes it less risky to do it, I guess, right?
yeah.
Well, I would like to add that there is a price to failure, which means
No, there's no price. Failure is free.
it takes a lot of your own money and your mother's money and your father's money. It's basically free, yes. But still, this is
What parents' money? The education is free in Ukraine for the most part.
good. But when you go out of the company and try to create your startup and you fail, there is a price to that. The problem is that the more failures you have, the more uncertainty it creates in the market. I think it's extremely important to have these good, strong success stories that really make it.
No,
And
but
you can pinpoint and say,
Yeah,
he made it.
But if I just can go back to John's point before you answer it, basically what you're saying is a paradox, right? So because you can always go back to an outsourcing, it's super low price of failure, super low risk, right? So
You're forgetting about the uneducated investor class. And they make 2 investments and think that's a portfolio and get obsessive about controlling these companies, and they're not tolerant of failure. They're not thinking portfolio strategy, they're not thinking 20 investments and expecting 18 of them to fail. So the failure from that sense is negative because they get scared out of the market and capital dries up to fund the companies.
If you even get an investor, which is huge lack of investors, basically.
Devil investors.
devil knows, not angels.
$50,000 for 80% of your company.
Now, I don't see that often. Does happen? Yeah.
Does it happen?
Yeah, but
Happens.
who takes
Absolutely.
those deals?
Yeah, you must be stupid if you take it, right?
But if you have no choice, Jonathan, you know it very well. If we're talking about Ukraine, there is basically 10 angel investors, 10 for the whole market, which means what choice do you have? You have choice, when you quitted your job, you started your startup, you can choose out of this 10, if someone even picks you, of course you have bad conditions because the market has no, it's undeveloped. The investors can ask what they can because there is no investment, there is no competition among investors, there is no investor education. So of course we can say that you should ask only for 10 or give only 10% of the equity. Absolutely yes, but there is no choice for that, which means you take what you get or you don't really get. There are so many educated good deals in the market.
Right, right. You know, John and Vitaly, both of you, come from Silicon Valley, have, a base in Ukraine, roots or family connections. You work in Ukraine, you've hired people there, both of you have led teams with locals, building stuff for the global market or at least for international clients. You obviously hire top of the gun people. I know that in both of your cases you really hired the best.
At least I do.
Well, that's something that can be sorted out after the panel, who has a bigger team. So, but
My team is really big.
But when you work with locals, so you hire the best people. Still, I mean, I've heard this often, even from you guys, is that it's hard to get people to think the product way. How do you deal with that? How do you instill that?
It's a sense of ownership. They still think of it as a job. And even, like in our case, we're a Delaware Corp, we're a US Corp, and everybody in our Ukraine office has stock options just like everybody in the US. And they don't really understand that. We have to explain them, hey, this is good, and you should, sign, did you do a digital signature on those docs? It's kind of important. The salary is nice, and we're paying you top of the market, but if the company does well, and you should be interested in helping the company do well, that will buy you an apartment.
Yeah, and you're very prolific in explaining that, right?
Yeah, to a certain degree. I mean, that's what we're trying to create, that culture where people understand what equity means, and we don't have to do it. We can easily hire the same people.
It's cheaper actually not to do it for you, right?
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't make a difference. In the US, you can incentivize somebody coming into an early stage startup, they'll take a 20, 40, 60% haircut on their salary to get more stock because they understand. But in Ukraine, you're not going to get any brownie points for that.
Yeah.
But we have to create that culture so people understand, and the word gets around saying this company did well, there was an exit, everybody in the company did well. And it creates a sense of ownership to where all the engineers are not just working on a project and not caring, but it's a sense of ownership. They're working on something that they own a piece of.
Well, I feel like we have to do a lot of education about that. I don't know about you, but for my team in Ukraine, there's a lot of education that we have to do. So things that you would not really in San Francisco spend a lot of time explaining. I have to have whole sessions of explaining. But I think that's the kind of value though that someone like us coming to a market can bring, because now those guys understand it and they can explain it to somebody else that they know that's going to another startup, or as more people join, then I won't have to sit in a room with a whiteboard explaining stock options.
Right.
And in our case, though, you know, with my team in Ukraine, we did it a little bit differently. We did RSUs, and we called them kind of like co-founders. But I mean, this was a little bit different. One thing, and the biggest challenge I think that we found, and it's a recurring one, is the first time that an employee that is not familiar with stock options in a country where stock options aren't regularly given out as part of performance compensation, that they're like, wait, I have to pay for this? There's what is this strike price? So wait, I don't understand. So you want me to give you money? And there's a really kind of funny example where I had helped a company from Los Angeles open up an office and hire some people in Ukraine, and he was like, I'm going to give them stock options, and we're going to treat everyone like employees, which you should treat all employees like employees at all times, as long as they're employees. And so he's making his job offers. He sits this guy down and he says, so here's the contract and here's the option, and the guy's like, you want me to pay you money for this job? You know.
Yeah. Right.
And so there was a whole process of like having to reel the guy back in and explain to him that nobody was asking him for money for the job.
Yeah.
And it took a couple of us to do it, because he really wanted to hire the guy. The guy just didn't understand this concept. So I think that's one of the challenges.
It's interesting. The traditions die hard, right? Because people are used to this kind of Soviet, whatever, old socialist mindset where, someone's basically trying to cheat you out of something, right? So it's, basically some kind of cheat that wants to, he doesn't want to give me money. He wants to actually, or less money he's going to give me. He's going to give me a part of a company that's worth nothing, right? And it dies very hard. I mentioned this already in Bulgaria. We had a big exit recently, a really big one, $260 million, yes, were paid for Telerik. And even there, when I was reading the reactions in the Bulgarian press and like on the forums, it was all like, so probably, a bunch of guys from Sofia that just started a company on an attic floor, $260 million. Nah, they probably know someone. It's probably an uncle somewhere. It's probably the prime minister did a call for them to that big American company. Something. He's probably going to get a kickback for it, right? So even when you actually have a success story, still most of the population thinks in the old way. There's something wrong here. There's something fishy. It's really hard. Really, traditions die really hard. If you look, at companies that have tried to do this, what are the biggest mistakes they make? For instance, you have a company of really good engineers. They're trying to do products. I've seen a couple of companies do this, also in Bulgaria. If you look at Ukraine, let's say you guys are all from Ukraine or related to Ukraine, what are the biggest mistakes they made? What are the biggest things you can do wrong when transitioning from services to products?
Probably transitioning from services to products.
That in itself, right?
Well, the most classic example of a company transitioning from services to product is 37 Signals that made Basecamp. And they're very vocal about how they did it. They're kind of anti-venture capital. They do their thing. And what they did is they set aside 20% of their time, 10 or 20% of their time to work on their product. And then when the product got to a point where it was breaking even, they stopped providing services and focused 100% on the product. That transition's nice. It seems clean in revisionist retrospect history, but it usually isn't that clean, and that's their particular example, not necessarily transferable to everybody. It's not easy to make that transition, and it's hard enough as it is to run a services company. It's hard enough as it is to build a product company. The skill sets don't necessarily translate, and really the point, when you have let's say, engineering team elsewhere, and you have, like in our case, we're servicing US market, and we have engineering team in Ukraine, all the product decisions and strategy is made in the US by people that are closest to the customers. That's a major area. So like I was saying before, you know, for somebody to go out of Poland, let's say, trying to attack the US market, well, guess what? Culturally, you probably won't understand the customer as well, very likely. But on the flip side, if you're servicing Poland, the US company is not going to understand Europe as well, or specific regions, specific cultures.
Right.
So there's that flip side. You have to be close to the customer as a product company.
It's not directly answering your question, but just a thought that we have. Estonia is quite popular today, but I would still like to bring an example from Estonia. But Estonian government had the same problem, that how should we transition our economy from outsourcing based to product based? And one of the biggest customers in the good cases could always be government. So government decided that we have to launch e-government. And it's mainly small particles. It's not just one big e-government, it's e-health, digital signature, whatever functionality. And at that time, at 97, I thought that Microsoft is too expensive for us, Oracle is too expensive, plus we should boost our own economy. So government started to subcontract the small companies or mid-sized companies for creating these products of e-government. And now that government has basically boosted its own IT market by buying these products, Estonian companies have ready-made products. For example, e-health, now it's exported to other countries. It was supported by government, for government, it is working for government, but meantime, also the good product was created, and now it's exported. Like Estonian IT company is building a tax system for Finland. It is basically copying the same which we made for Estonia, but it was kind of part of the plan of product development. But it is a good case. Government doing business is usually the bad case. This is a good case.
So it's basically Keynesian economics, right? Even in the US, most developed capitalism in the world, it's a third consumer market, a third business market, a third government market. Government is a big customer, and without government as a customer, Silicon Valley wouldn't have been born, period.
Wouldn't exist at all, right?
Yeah. And I think that in transitioning from, let's say, services to product in a market, and something that is pretty relevant to e-government, you know, I think that you have really only two paths to travel. You can build something. If you're going to build a product and transition out of services, you build products either for your own market, for problems that you understand, or you build a product that is super universal. So let's look at markets where this has worked. Like, okay, take for example antivirus. So this works pretty well because everybody understands that computers get viruses, and there should be some way that they don't, right? And I think that when you look at something also like if you take Skype, okay, so Skype is about messaging, and messaging is a pretty universal kind of thing. Everybody understands. We want to have a chat. We want to have a video conference. I mean, this is you know, something that if you're creating that product, you're not wondering if anybody would have a need or a use for it. It's definitely universal, and it's a problem that you can understand, or a product that you can create without having to go to another market. I guess an example that I'll use from a company in Ukraine. I once met a founder that said, I am going to solve the problem of procurement in the United States for small businesses. I go, that sounds interesting. So what do you know about small businesses in the United States? Maybe you worked there or what? No, I've never been to the US. Okay. So, I mean, I think that those are probably the problems you want to try to stay away from. And that there's always a local opportunity. It might not be that big one, but if it's your first product, if that's the first thing that you do, you'll understand the problem really well.
Yeah.
You'll be able to validate the solution because anyway, it's your home market. And if it goes well, you know, maybe you can graduate. Otherwise, do something really big, really universal,
right,
and really obvious. Which means though that you're going to have a lot of competition, and your idea, that solution, that problem that you solve, it better be really, really compelling.
Again, it's not directly answer the question, but in Estonia there is a very popular business plan contest, Brain Hunt, each year. And a few years ago, I was mentor for one team who was producing.
Brain Hunt sounds like a zombie game.
It is actually quite cool. It is TV. huge TV show, and weekly they give different tasks to solve and so on. So anyways, I was mentoring one team, Lulu, maybe you know, who was producing cat litter. Very cool team and so on. But at that point, when some of the judges asked, so your cat is using it, and the founder said, well, actually, I don't have a cat I'm allergic to. Then the case was lost. If you're not using it, if you don't use it in the local market, if you can't success in the local market, why would you do it somewhere else and could solve someone else's problem?
Eat your own cat food.
Well, that's actually really interesting. I'm building a cat litter business, but I don't have a cat.
Well, there's 4 paradigms of design, and that fails on the self-design. That still could be valid, though. If they properly apply research and getting feedback from customers, they kind of start, they have to get a certain amount of traction from the start. They have to have some kind of insight to begin with.
When do you do it? Yeah.
But ultimately, they need to get to this point where it's all based on flying on instruments, based on feedback.
Okay, yes. Before we wrap up, a very kind of generic thing. In all these countries, Poland is, I'm sure, no different. I know it's not different. So many software companies. You go to these events. They're full of people that are always like, yeah, I work in this software company, I want to do products, I want to be cool like a startup and everything. What would be the one piece of advice for all these thousands of people that might be startup founders, but not just the usual, just do it, but like, what are the things they should or shouldn't do, or should focus on?
I think that this statement that I've just made about looking at the problem that you can solve that's super local first, and trying to kind of cut your teeth on that, or doing something really big, right? So in some way I feel like I've answered that question, so I'll let everybody else answer.
Solve a specific problem for a specific customer.
Yes, I've always preached that. That's why I don't want to repeat that. But again, solving a problem in an understandable way, meaning that you don't come to an investor and say, I have an idea which is the greatest in the world and I could solve this problem. No, there should be also a plan for solving. Idea, maybe first customers, execution, solving, adding to this.
All right.
Yeah, do something really obvious.
Yeah.
I mean, really obvious. The more obvious, the easier to explain. I think the more simple the solution to the problem. I think oftentimes you'll look at it, you'll be like, oh, this is too obvious. That's the one you should do.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Like a razor blade series called that. If you have a room where is one guy with a cut throat and one guy holding the knife, then probably he is the killer. Meaning, if this is the most obvious choice, maybe this is the obvious choice, yeah?
Yeah, if it looks like something, it is. If it looks like something, it sounds like something, probably is something, right? Like a dog. It's probably is a dog, right? Interesting. From my point of view, what I just want to add to this is that a lot of successful product companies were actually born out of like real non-commercial experiments. I'm thinking about Prezi, for instance. Prezi was the first iterations of Prezi were in the early 90s when Adam, with a couple of his video designer friends, were actually building software on some kind of weird old DOS program on a 386 to kind of visualize. It was for art installations. They wanted to like visualize a presentation for an art installation. This was like super basic, and then they iterated on that, and that became kind of a thing in the video art world for a couple of years. And then on that, they started building something that might be interesting for businesses, but it was like not a company for a very long time. It was just a thing, a project. TomTom and the Netherlands, same story. TomTom started in around 1989. They were playing around with some Philips hardware at that time and trying to do like a mappy thing for it, which was completely not commercial. And that kind of worked, and then they were like, okay, you can actually make a business out of it. So like that seems to work pretty well when you have a bunch of like people from another industry or from a completely non-startup world, let's say, trying to successfully building the next big thing. Okay, we can take a question from the audience if there is any. Ellie, you want me to give you a mic, or I'm going to give you a mic.
I was listening to you guys, and before that was the cargo cult presentation, and I can't but think that transitioning from service company to a product company just looks a lot like a product, like a cargo cult. I mean, maybe I've seen only the bad examples, but the companies that I know that are in this transition, they literally what they want to do is make a very similar product to the latest customer they've served. They just think they could make it better. But, what is your comment on this?
Well, this is the idea problem.
Right? You wanna give him a mic?
This is the problem of being another example, being an auto mechanic and being like, I think I could really build a better car that didn't break all the time. Probably it's not the best idea in any case, but maybe you could do it. And I think that sometimes the most obvious problem might be the one that you've been sort of you've been traveling down the path of. But then I think that's very temporal, right? So if that seems like the best idea, if you find yourself in this transition, and every time you work with a customer, you think, well, I could do this better, and then that's the thing that you want to do. I think that you need to be a little bit more committed than that, right? So you should be sure that this is constant over a few customers, that you've done a few different things, and that this is still the thing that you want to do before you do it.
And that they're usually underestimating the sales and marketing effort. Like, yeah, we can build it. Sure, okay, you can build it. But with most companies, like a company like Slack, Messenger, right? There's a million different messengers. We use a different one. And Slack, their hustle, their execution on sales and marketing made them $1 billion company in, what, a year and a half or less?
Yeah.
As a chat client. And Yammer did that before, just before, and sold to Microsoft, doing the same exact thing. And there are a million other chat clients and little team chats that are worthless. So it's all about sales and marketing and being able to, there's what, a handful, there's 15 companies, 15 unicorns in the venture capital world that return 90% of the venture returns every year. And those unicorns usually have really good sales and marketing hustle besides being able to write software. Takes both. And services companies usually either underestimate the sales and marketing effort, or think that it's all about execution. Well, really just one thing. They just underestimate the sales and marketing effort that it requires to get this product out to market.
Yeah.
Yes, and sometimes the transition is not random. It just happens over the process. Means that you have a very good customer, you have certain customer niche, you know certain demands or expectations of the customers, and you start transforming it or packaging it into product. As I said, Estonia e-government, e-health, it was the aim was to make a product. Yes, they understood it's going to take 3 years, 5 years, 7 years, but is it just random outsourcing, or is it really like some service-oriented skill and know-how adding that could be spinned out into a product? So I think it's also like strategic thinking, whether you want to transform it into a product and what you should do, how you should do.
Right, okay. Any more questions from anyone? No? Okay. Now, this was it. Guys, thank you very much. And with this, thank you. Applause for the panel, please. And with this, we're closing down this, this podium, I think, right? No, we're not? Is it one more presentation? Okay, you told me it would be canceled. Okay, so we're not. This is it, though. Yeah, that's it, with his presentation on whatever. Now, anyways, I just wanted to thank everyone who's here, who was here today. This was Startup Adventure. We'll be back in Poland in April with probably a dedicated event, probably in Krakow, maybe in Warsaw, I have no idea yet. And we'll be bringing more cool speakers and doing more cool things, connecting you guys to the international startup world, startup ecosystem. So thank you very much. Thanks.